Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us for tonight's resiliArt debate, brought to you by the King Abdulaziz Center for World Culture, the flagship initiative of Saudi Aramco's citizenship, and better known as Ithra. This initiative is being held in partnership with UNESCO, creators of the resiliArt debate movement, as a first in the GCC. My name is Abdullah and I'm part of Ithra's management here in Dhahran. Here at Ithra, we've been at the frontier of Saudi's cultural and creative movement, but this isn't news to any of you that these are unprecedented times. Challenging times where we've seen tragic loss of life, economic collapse resulting from the pandemic. These have created enormous economic hardships. This is also a particularly difficult and challenging moment for the arts and museums, with museums and galleries closing, exhibitions canceled, and artists isolated. The journey to rebuild, or possibly even reimagine, our cultural sector is one clouded with unclarity and uncertainty. Yet, on the positive side, we've seen enormous and exponential growth in consumption of art and culture as people adapt to a more virtual and digital channel. What is clear is that cultural institutions like Ithra, artists, governments, and the creative private sector will play a telling role in shaping our future. The title of tonight's debate is From Dystopia to Utopia, Our Changing Cultural Landscape. We are joined by 6 panelists from around the globe to discuss the post-pandemic cultural landscape. We look at this through the lens of the Arab world, but also an outlook on the global impact. Tonight's debate will explore the future we hope to build as nations reopen and as we readapt to what may be the old normal or the new normal. Through arts and culture, we have a unique story to tell and a distinct telling opportunity in this world. I want to thank our partners UNESCO for creating the resiliArt debate movement and for partnering with Ithra as we bring you this engaging channel. Helping us navigate tonight, we're really excited to have Laura Egerton moderating the session. Laura is a writer and curator, originally from London, but came in 2006 and helped establish Art Dubai. She has worked with Louvre Abu Dhabi and at Circal Avenue, and helped in numerous publications, including The National, Canvas, Selections, and Open Skies, among many others. And before I leave you with Laura and start the debate, I want to turn it to our partners, UNESCO, through a statement represented by Ms. Anna Paolini, the Director of UNESCO's Office for GCC and Yemen. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm sure you will find tonight's debate intriguing and enriching.
It is a great pleasure to be with you to launch this resiliArt debate, Dystopia to Utopia, our changing cultural landscape, on the ongoing shift in the current cultural, social, and economic landscape from an Arab perspective. UNESCO is very proud to partner with the King Abdulaziz Center for World Culture for this event. And I would like to thank you all the people that contributed to organize this initiative. I also would like to welcome and thank the panelists and everyone remotely joining today's debate. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected the whole world, plunging the global economy into a recession. The current health crisis is likely to cost the economy $1 trillion during the 2020, according to UNCTAD. ILO estimated that in the first quarter of this year, the loss of employment is of 305 million jobs compared to the 22 million of last year. The creative sector is one of the most affected. The pandemic has in fact impacted the entire creative value chain: creation, production, distribution, and access, and considerably weakened the professional, social, and economic status of artists and cultural professionals. To monitor the situation in the culture sector, UNESCO has launched a weekly culture and COVID-19 impact and response tracker, available on our website, to provide an overview on the rapidly evolving situation. A recent report that we just published, Museums Around the World in the Face of COVID-19, shows that museums have been particularly affected by this pandemic, with 90% having closed their doors during the crisis, including all 473 museums located in the Arab region, and more than 10% possibly will never open again. This is a great loss for the culture sector. While we are pleased to see that 11 Arab states have developed a digital presence during this pandemic, however, this doesn't seem enough. But art is resilient. Many artists and cultural practitioners have imagined innovative and creative solutions, often by using digital tools to continue their activities, stream, and to connect with the public. Music, songs, and dance allow individuals to express themselves and maintain social ties despite travel restriction and home confinement. This extraordinary time also demonstrated the central role culture plays in building resilience and social cohesion. To respond to the risk posed by the health crisis to the livelihood of cultural professionals, UNESCO launched the resiliArt global campaign and social media movement. It aims to strengthen the resilience of artists and cultural professionals in the face of the enormous challenges posed by the current health crisis. It is an online debate with key industry professionals and artists, both established and emerging, that raise awareness on the far-reaching impact of the pandemic, as well as the importance of cultural and creative industries for economic development and social cohesion. In this context, today's debate is extremely relevant. The cultural sector around the world has felt the impact of the pandemic and has had to adjust significantly to this change. How we restart the creative economy? Moving forward from this dystopia movement, what are the roles of cultural institutions, artists, governments, and the private sector in achieving culture sector sustainability? What are their roles in safeguarding our creative society and fostering productivity and growth? I'm therefore very pleased to see that today's debate will try to reply to some of these questions and to reimagine the role that art and cultural institutions can play in the production, consumption, and distribution of culture, and that the arts in the post-pandemic world. I thank you all of you for your participation, and I wish you a fruitful, but especially very creative debate.
Good evening. I would like to start by thanking the team at Ithra and UNESCO for inviting me to moderate this important debate. In the past few extraordinary months, life as we know it has altered immeasurably. We have all, hopefully, become dab hands at virtual meetings, which miraculously allow us to travel the globe without leaving our desks. But as the world tentatively begins to reopen, is there a chance that the cultural sector can adapt to the brave new world we find ourselves in and come out stronger? I welcome you to this session, which is scheduled to run for roughly 110 minutes. We invite you all to take part, an active part in the proceedings. You may share questions and comments through the chat box. Please select all panelists and attendees. I will collate these and ask the panelists to address a selection following our initial conversations. Acting as an agent of change and a catalyst for the creative industry, this UNESCO's resiliArt debate belongs to artists, to cultural institutions, and to stakeholders. It belongs to us all. It is impossible to discuss culture without considering the people and organizations that create it, those that appreciate it, that sanction it, that nurture it. These are people and organizations that are at breaking point. And yet, we have all witnessed that culture is what people reach to in times of crisis. It can unite, it can negate boundaries, it can bring escapism and pure joy. Dystopia is a term bandied about freely today. In its definition, it describes an utterly cataclysmic situation, a place that is undesirable or frightening, where there's been some sort of breakdown, be it due to a tyrannical government, an environmental or economic disaster, or indeed a pandemic. On the other hand, Thomas More's Utopia, a fictional island in the South Atlantic Ocean, was an imagined society that was near perfect. The use of the term cultural landscape in our title today is worth highlighting as well. A landscape exists as a living synthesis of people and place, vital to forming an identity. This conversation has lofty ambitions of journeying from our current dystopic moment to find some form of utopia. Let's use it as a chance to dream, a chance to instigate change, to examine how the crisis has altered the ways we consume, produce, and distribute culture. We will focus on museums and the visual arts, the direct impact that COVID-19 has had on artists' livelihoods. Artists are witnesses of our time. What types of support do they need? Where can this come from? How can their voices be best heard? There is no part of the world that the pandemic has not reached. Today, we will focus on the context of the Arab world, a remarkably diverse group of nations who have not been at the forefront of news reporting on the crisis, and yet are as affected as anywhere else, and arguably more so, given the instability of many of their societies, their dependence on the oil industry and tourism. During lockdown, we have witnessed regional organisations instigating remarkable, innovative initiatives. But is there enough consistent support to keep the art world afloat? Hereby, I'm delighted to introduce you to our 5 esteemed panellists. Firstly, Her Excellency, Sheikha Hala Mohammed Al Khalifa, Director General of Culture and Arts at the Bahrain Authority for Culture and Antiquities. She is a practicing artist with local and international exposure and has been an art professor at the University of Bahrain. Among her many accomplishments, she holds degrees in fine arts from the School of the Museum of Fine Arts at Tufts University and the Slade School of Fine Arts in London. Dr. Linda Kamaroff is the Department Head for Art of the Middle East at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. She has published extensively on Islamic and contemporary Middle Eastern art and is the recipient of 2 Fulbright Fellowships, the Alfred H. Barr Jr. Award and the Muslim Public Affairs Council Media Award. She has served on the faculties of Princeton University, Hamilton College, New York University, and UCLA. Dr. Komarov also curated the exhibition of Islamic art, Beauty and Identity, currently on display at Ithra. A medical doctor by profession, Ahmed Matta is an artist and producer at the forefront of the Middle East cultural sector and a significant voice documenting contemporary life in Saudi Arabia in a global context. He was the first contemporary Saudi artist to be collected and showcased by major Western museums, such as the Brooklyn Museum and the Smithsonian Institution. In 2017, he was appointed the director of the artist-centered Saudi cultural organization, the Misk Art Institute. Dr. Nada Shabut is a professor of art history and the coordinator of the Contemporary Arab and Muslim Cultural Studies Initiative at the University of North Texas. She is the founding president of the Association for Modern and Contemporary Art from the Arab world, Iran, and Turkey. She has published numerous articles on modern and contemporary Arab and Iraqi art, curated multiple exhibitions, and has been the recipient of a number of prestigious awards. She is currently working on a new book project, Demarcating Modernism in Iraqi Art, the Dialectics of the Decorative, 1951 to 1979, under contract with the American University in Cairo Press. Akram Zaatari is a filmmaker, photographer, archival artist, and curator who has played an instrumental role in developing Beirut's contemporary art scene. He has produced more than 50 films interconnected by the theme of documenting political history and war. As a co-founder of the Arab Image Foundation, he has made invaluable and uncompromising contributions to the wider discourse on preservation and archival practice. Zaatari's work has also been widely exhibited worldwide in biennials and is part of institutional collections such as the Centre Pompidou, Tate Modern, and MoMA, among others. So without further ado, let me start our debate. COVID-19's impact on the cultural sector worldwide has been devastating for many. As we've heard, museums and cultural centres have closed, productions have shut down, events have been cancelled, artists have been isolated. While it might seem too early to truly understand the financial, creative, and human impact of the shutdown, stories are already emerging. And each of you, my 5 esteemed panellists, I'm sure, has a story. I'd like to begin by asking how COVID-19 has impacted you personally, professionally, in terms of your roles as artists, as academics, as curators, and what impact the pandemic has had on the world in which each of you operates. I turn first to Sheikha Hala to give us some insight on how the Kingdom of Bahrain is faring through the crisis. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Laura. Thank you very much for all our esteemed panelists and everyone listening to us tonight. I would like to thank Ithra for this wonderful opportunity to connect with everyone and to discuss this important matter. And collaborating with UNESCO is also wonderful, and resilient art is a fantastic topic to start talking about. Of course, when this crisis hit all of us, it was sudden and shocking, and we all had to adapt very quickly. In the Kingdom of Bahrain, when the crisis hit, it was at the mid of our cultural season, where all our events were cancelled, and suddenly there was a disconnect between us in the cultural institution and our community and our immediate audiences. So we had to revise our strategies and think of ways to reconnect, to reopen our platforms, to share. And it's very important to keep the moral of the society high and to give new ways to think of how culture can be an asset in times of crisis. And having said that, the writer and novelist and professor of English literature, Azar Nafisi, she's a wonderful author who had a great talk here in Bahrain at the Sheikh Ibrahim Center for Culture and Research in Marhab. And she spoke about several topics that I would like to share with everyone. She said words that were very powerful to me, and I'd like to share them with you. She spoke about how we cannot lose hope in a world that created Rumi and Dante. We should learn about the world through music, through art, through stories. And we need imagination in order to imagine a future that does not yet exist. And I really feel that these are beautiful words that can help us, help our morals, help our communities to overcome this sudden, shocking crisis that we're all facing. Of course, we have revised our strategies. We came up with new ways to connect with our audiences on this virtual platform that's being, celebrated in this time, really. But I'm a firm believer that culture is really the backbone of every society, and creative minds will have so much to share and a lot to support various peoples in various fields. So I know that we are all facing a lot of struggle and uncertainties, but we really have to hold on to beauty and to culture and to hope and to connect to help us overcome the situation we're at the moment.
Thank you. Let's turn westward to Dr. Linda. Firstly, I mean, how is the life of a curator of an institution that is currently closed, I know with plans to reopen, but with exhibitions grounded across the world? How has future exhibition been impacted for you? Let's unmute.
All right. First, thank you for including me in this panel discussion. I have to say that I am incredibly fortunate, and I've realized that more and more, and that my life has hardly been impacted compared to so many others around the world, that I have home security, food security, job security. So I have no complaints in that respect. In terms of my life as a curator, I feel in a way it's been enriched during this period, because LACMA much of LACMA, not all of it, was closed anyway, because we're building a new building. We have ongoing exhibitions, and those will reopen hopefully in the beginning of July or thereabouts. But this has been a wonderful time for me to think. I have 2 exhibitions that I'm working on, and as far as I know, inshallah, they are going forward. And so I've had time to think about those as well. Mostly though, I'd say for all the curators at LACMA, we've all taken this time to think about how we're going to install the new building, which is something itself that's going to force us to rethink an encyclopedic museum and to rethink art history in a way. So it's kind of exciting. And what I've been thinking about, especially because I'm concerned not just with contemporary, but especially historical art, is the idea of how you make the past more exciting and how we learn from the past. I mean, in America right now, I think most Americans of good conscience are rethinking American history and how we got to the point where we are, and are fighting back against the idea that you can't rewrite history. you can rewrite history and you should rewrite history. And if we can rewrite history, we can certainly rewrite art history and produce an art history that is not only factually correct, but reflects our world as we live in it today. And I think that because if the past can become dynamic, the past interacts with the present and allows us to change the future. It's not so much like in science fiction where you can go back into the past to change the future, or maybe it is, because we can change how we see the past, and we can do this through art. And I think that changes people's perspectives. Artists, art historians, and the public alike, when they see the art of the past differently, different priorities given to it, different hierarchies created, a non-linear approach to the art. And that's, I think, what the new building we have coming at LACMA, designed by Peter Zumthor, forces us to do, because the space is simply not the standard museum space. And I think that the result will not be a standard museum installation, but something, I'm hopeful, will change the way we see art, both of the past and the present, and of course it will impact art in the future. So that's what I've been doing.
Thank you. That's wonderful to think. I mean, I often feel that one huge positive that can be, or learning curve that can come out of the Gulf, is that we have been debating, you know, how to make an institution relevant. You know, with the building of Ithra of Louvre Abu Dhabi, it's been at the forefront of our minds for the last decade. And to see that LACMA is again looking towards the next stage is wonderful. I think I must actually jump on that point directly to Dr. Nada Shaboot, really, because are we rewriting art history as a result of COVID-19? Can I jump to you?
Sure. And first, I want to echo my panelists and thanking you and thanking Ithra and UNESCO for organizing this panel. And I have to say that, like Linda, I think I'm cherishing this period of time that you know, gave me the opportunity to, I want to say slow down, but it hasn't really slowed down because there are just new projects. But I mean, my sort of my career has been about rewriting art history. And so I am happy to see that there is momentum at this moment to push in that direction. And as always, we modernists take advantage of the contemporary moment to push in that direction. So, you know, there have been an opportunity with this sort of situation, the unfortunate situation, but you know, which is sort of frustrating and hopeful politically in the United States specifically, to go into new adventures. So as a professor of art history, sure, we had to sort of shift immediately without notice to teaching online. And, you know, God help our students who, you know, survive through our experimenting, because I'm certainly someone who resisted online teaching for art history. I still felt like, you know, being in the classroom is more beneficial. But to be honest, I was surprised to see how useful and the, you know, specific benefits that come out of teaching online with more focus maybe. I mean, at the end of the day, when I'm showing slides in class, my students are not seeing the real artwork in the museum anyway. And so the impact has not been as such, where, you know, in fact now they see it close up on their screen, and we're able to engage with more focused discussion. Now, I will have to reinvent all of my courses for remote teaching for next semester, because while our university will open, most of our classes, and particularly art history classes, will remain remotely taught. But this also gave this sort of the shift of where other things have closed, you know, museums, exhibitions, and all of these things. There's sort of more focus on material to put online. So, you know, all kinds of forums like this one and many other ones that now become available. It's not just in that one venue, and maybe it's videoed and maybe it's not. It is now digital to start with. And in fact, these become resources for teaching. And also, there are all these initiatives, like, for example, the Majlis, cultural Majlis that Sultan Qasimi started. He was doing it in New York and in DC and in Boston Well, he's done, I think, 30 sessions since the quarantine, since the lockdown. They're all online. They're all actually very sort of global because everyone from everywhere can engage with them, and they remain online. Yesterday, there was a session on by Muzaffar about Rafa al-Nasri. That was a wealth of information, a wealth of resources that will be essential for me in the rewriting of artistry, but also in teaching, as a teaching resources for my students.
Wonderful. I mean, it's fantastic to hear that. Like you say, forums can be kind of across boundaries. But I want to jump to our artists, because something you mentioned there, are we happy to see artwork on a screen, for one thing? But Ahmed Mata, your initial training as a doctor must give you a very distinct take on the present moment. Tell us how the crisis has affected your work.
Actually, I think when I start, generally in the life of artists, sometimes artists go to the isolation life, and that was something that, I felt it when I start with the crisis and the corona. And I stay in my studio, but I feel directly that we need to connect to the people. And something come, and I see it's very important and positive on this. If we look to the positive side of this crisis, that all of the people around the world share the same problem, and that we share the same. And this is something that can unify everyone. We share same problem. That I think from that things and people, and I felt from my studio, I start connecting to the artists, to my friends, to curators, to the writers, and something coming back to our life. And thank you for the digital age, helping us to open the doors again. I spend most of time in my studio, and I start a book, doing a book that I was planning for. My memory is taking me back with the medicine to study about the history of epidemiology. It's very important because, I start to look in the back when other pandemic happened, how it's look like, because also doing and try to go to study what happened in the history is very important. At the same time, art in the digital time has something very important to work with the, image and communication. Communication with the digital age create a lot of important debate and connection and discussion that could shape the future that we are now, or our debate is about.
Thank you. Thank you. No, absolutely relevant. I do feel there is some type of conflict there, though, between our accessibility in the digital age versus an artist reaching full isolation. In a way, maybe Shakespeare achieved greatness during a plague because he was completely isolated. Maybe there was some form of distraction through the digital. But Akram, let us please also hear from you. Your practice is embedded in your native Lebanon, its troubled past and present tragedy. How has your practice been impacted in recent months?
I was lucky because I had finished all the productions that I had at hand. So I had an exhibition in Milano in the mid of April, and we shipped all the exhibition from Sharjah to Milan. And before shipping it to Milan, it was supposed to go to Germany, but then we changed all the papers, everything, and it took some time to do that. And one day after the shipment left from Sharjah by sea to Genoa, the exhibition was postponed. Everything was on hold in Milan. It was one of the first cities to be seriously contaminated. So I said, okay, if it happened one day in advance, we could have stopped the shipment. So anyway, the shipment arrived in Genoa, and now it was delivered to the museum. The museum was closed, of course, but they had one person to at least take the shipment in and lock the exhibition. So but I mean, artists' work engages with history really seriously, because I think artists produce records. All types of labor produce records, including artist work. Of course, it's a record plus so many other layers, but these records are essential to the understanding of the times, to the understanding of the place for future generations. And I honestly do not see it. I mean, it's something that continues. It's like a sky. I mean, whether there is war, whether there's a volcano, it would still. There would still be a sky, there would still be rain, there would still be clouds, and there will still be artists, even though sometimes at very serious, seriously worrying times, one might doubt that. Mm. So yeah, I mean, I was not in the middle. I mean, I was one of those privileged ones who actually was in between works. So I extended that lapse of reflection, let's say, and I concentrated on my archives. I organized a lot of my archives. I'm planning a new book. I started painting as well. I'm very much known as a video artist or video maker with a focus on photography. I did many paintings, and I really, really enjoyed slowing down, and I enjoyed the silence around me, because I live near a school, actually. So I really enjoyed the silence.
I think that really is something which everyone is united in despite the terribleness, the hideousness of the moment. We've managed to find some sort of peace. We have time in our lives that we never seemed to have before. I feel that's something that everyone is united by, and finding silence is wonderful. I'm looking forward to seeing the result of your paintings, Akram. That's wonderful. And to think about how the world must remain the same whilst we wake in a new reality. So let me move on to my second question. Just before I do so, just to remind the attendees that it would be best for you to ask questions and comments in the Q&A box, if you could, on the Zoom, so we can channel them in the right way. So everything has changed, as we're mentioning, practically, with artworks being stuck, the ways we work, the ways we travel, where we shop, how we connect with friends, families, colleagues, audiences. Performances are moving online. Conversations such as this are being held over Zoom. We've already discussed the benefits and shortfalls of this medium. We're looking at art through a screen rather than in person. From each of your individual vantage points, do you believe that we have entered into a new age in terms of how we experience art and culture? Is this temporary? How will this change how and what artists create, and how art and culture is experienced? Ahmed, you've already mentioned your upcoming publication, Prognosis, that's due to be released in October. I mean, how do you envisage people interacting with your artworks moving forward?
I think during this time I was working on a book, and I chose the title Prognosis. And I think during this time of isolation, like what Akram said, it's this to be slowly and to revise. I review more and I focus more, and that was very, very important moment. Not for me. I think all of the world in a slow and revised moment to see or to understand and to the future. And I think it's very important, because we discover a lot of things that the new time, or, you know, we live in the very materialistic moment. If we see the news every day, it's full of news that make us, you know, in big chaos, or it's a crazy time. So I think something, and I see it now in everywhere, coming back to find another part of if I can say the soul, or our part of the life. So something that's very, very important. And I think that's one of the things that's important in this moment, in art and culture and spirituality, because with the material, you know, we are living the, if I can say, meritocracy moment of the life. All of the politicians promise everyone with the good health, with the good education, with the good, all of these promises come with this, you know, system of merit. And within this flood of information and materialistic life, everyone imbalance, maybe imbalance with work, maybe imbalance with intellectuality, imbalance with whatever. So I think this time is very important to revise and to see the another part of our life, the soul, the if I can say the, you know, something to replace the spirituality, to find the part of the spirituality. I think that's very, very important. And that's why I try to, in the new book, open a door for prognosis. And when I read the history, I find a lot of similar events happening in pandemic. And usually after this pandemic, there is a change, economic, politic, religion, and of course, culture is all of that together. So that's in general, yeah.
That's so valuable to bring into the discussion. I mean, mental, you know, the damage to mental health that is happening with this pandemic is really going to see something that we're going to see the impact of in coming years. And of course, you know, arts do have a key role in this time of being a safe space to you know, challenge issues, to debate, to set, you know, the therapeutic power of creativity. It's sort of more important than ever.
I remember one quote while saying that. I remember a quote by Nietzsche, and it's a quite controversial, but it's very important. He said, "A culture should replace scripture."
Yeah.
And that's the promises. But imagine now it's the culture that replaced the materialistic future. And I think this saying, it was a promising say. I think it's something that everyone needs to find, every system, I'm speaking about system as a community, should find this part in their life.
Thank you. Akram, can I move to you? I mean, do you feel that sometimes your artwork can bring joy? It can take people away from this reality. Do you feel any of your works have managed to do that, to achieve that during the crisis?
I think every artwork wants to be a trip, a mental trip somewhere. And this is why art helps you. I mean, helps you to also to make encounters with virtual characters, with fictitious characters, to let your mind drift away from your immediate reality, whether it's a nice reality, enjoyable or unenjoyable. So, so with that mission, let's say, or with that possibility, at the times of confinement, of course, art is a primary savior, let's say. Whether it is communicated virtually or in other forms, that's another issue, because art truly needs an interface. Even a painting, when you want to go see an original, you need to travel to see it, whether you travel 5 minutes or 5 hours or 5 days. If you want to adjust that experience or change it and make it viewable online, you need to create an interface. I don't mind this or that, as long as I'm able to comment on the interface, because I'm still alive. I mean, if we're showing a painting of a 19th century painter, the option is not there. But if you want to show a film, because I prefer showing a film in a theater, that's where you get the best conditions. But for those who don't want to move, for those who live in a city or in a province where it's unlikely to show the film, either you wait for it to be broadcasted on TV, or you resort to what we call video on demand, like Netflix or else. It goes the same for an exhibition. An exhibition is normally adjusted in space. It's made to sit and settle in space. If you want it to settle a virtual space, you would still need to design it. Yeah, that's.
I mean, I do think in some ways artists who've already worked in digital media are at some sort of advantage with distributing their work during this time.
Yes, artists I mean, if you work in film, definitely you have uploaded and downloaded an infinite number of gigabytes. Yeah. But to make something to be perceived online is slightly different. Or it's like to design a website, let's say. Yeah, to design an interface to show you photographs and films and other materials at the same time is not easy, but it's worth it. It's worth doing for sure. I do believe in that shortcut. I do believe in the in encountering more people, in being exposed to more people from different places.
Absolutely, and audiences are growing exponentially online. Sheikha Hala, can I turn to you just to focus on your artistic practice? What has been your creative response as an artist to this time?
Well, for me, you know, not being so occupied with events and attending functions and you know, this also for anyone working in any cultural institution, it can be a little bit draining when we're, you know, running from one event to another and suddenly it's very, very quiet. So for my growth as an artist, I think I was very fortunate because I was able to find some time to reflect on my work. I mean, you know, so that's one of the positive outcomes of what we're going through. But I'm still a firm believer that many of the artists that I have spoken with or people I interact with also found this time very rewarding because they're not in a rush producing work or, you know, meeting deadlines or being in a rush to do something. It's a much more focused time to think of new messaging, of new ideas to tackle, of things that are very current, not only for people in the art world, but for communities in general. And I also came across a very interesting platform on Instagram. It's called the COVID Art Museum. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but it was a very interesting platform because so many artists from all around the world were able to share their work and to discuss. And for me to you know, accidentally, you know, see that site, I think it also it makes you connect to so many people in different parts of the world and also explore their visual, you know, their visual works online and to see what they're going through in one Instagram page.
You know,
I also
curated or selected the museum?
To be honest, I don't know the details, but I was, you know, I started following them and I really enjoyed what they are sharing. And, you know, it's very diverse. Artists from all around the world are sending their works to be seen on that. And it's interesting because it's the COVID Art Museum. So, you know, this virtual museum appeared in this times of crisis. But I'm a firm believer in how cities shape and form and become creative. And there's this wonderful author, he's a speaker and he's an advisor on cultural strategies for many cities. His name is Charles Landry. And he wrote a book, I don't know if you came across his work, but he wrote a very interesting book to talk about culture and to talk about how cities can evolve. And I do believe that in this crisis, we will come out of it in a positive way. And the main asset, as Charles and many other people believe, the main asset of any, you know, progress are the people. You know, it's the scholars, it's the artists, it's the creatives of any society that can really raise awareness and make a change. Of course, there are so many other people in our communities that are, you know, like, for instance, the medical teams. I mean, I see the wonderful teams here in Bahrain that are working so hard to create stability and to test and to make sure, you know, people, the well-being of the community is properly looked after. So this is something to really salute and to you know, and to recommend how wonderful their work has been going on. But I'm a firm believer that through art and through culture and through beauty, we can also achieve so much.
Thank you, thank you. Dr. Nada, I'm always brought back to when I took some Emiratis to London and took them to the National Gallery for the first time, and they saw Van Gogh's sunflowers, and they were like, it's the size, it's this size. They'd only seen it in a book, they'd only seen it online. I mean, how much of a problem is that? I mean, obviously it's fantastic to have artworks available online, but is there, as an academic, as an art historian, what are your views on that?
Well, I mean, you know, would love to be able to take every class to every museum in the world and show them the real works of art. But the reality is art education, particularly art history, has always relied on pictures of images. And I think actually seeing them online gives them a better opportunity because they may see them in a gallery as opposed to just seeing that one image. So they can, excuse me, scale it. So, I mean, we try to always remind our students that what you're seeing is a, you know, an image on a picture, on a page, which is not the real scale. And so you need to look for more, try to imagine it in a different way. That's a problem that we have not been able to, you know, change. Same would go with a PowerPoint presentation showing them that image. But was it a week after the lockdown around the world that there were 250 museums that went online with their collections, and you can have virtual tours of the museums? You know, a moment of me thinking, where was that before? Why didn't we have this if you were able to do this? Because the other reality is, to follow up on what Akram was saying, while of course, you know, when you make a work of art, you make it for the space. And if you make a film, you want to show it in a theater. But the reality is also not that, you know, people can or cannot go. Most people cannot go. My students are not going to be able to go to LACMA, for example, for exhibitions. But if LACMA comes to them now in a different way, because they're able to access it virtually, even if it's not necessarily specifically altered for, you know, I mean, I think museums are doing that as artists are doing that, but the virtual sort of, you know, trail of things is actually opening up for possibilities for my students in ways that were not able before. There is a democratizing aspect for this digital platform that has allowed students to, you know, more access. And the lockdown, as it gave me more time to sort of maybe, you know, start reading the first book in the large stack of books that I couldn't get to, it's allowing students to go into and search these platforms because they are not running around from one place to the other. I mean, I think, yes, we look forward for the world to open up again and maybe go back to some of what it used to be. But I'm hoping this is a moment of reflection, of, you know, consideration. Do we really need the art world to be the way it was before? And as Hala said, I'm also really happy to not have to be jumping on planes continuously from one place to the other. And, you know, for being able to sort of do more substantial work on one thing as opposed to 10 things.
Precisely, and I'm just daily impressed and staggered by the intricacy of digital technologies. I mean, viewing the galleries in Al Sakal, for example, during Art Week was incredible. I mean, you really did feel like you were physically in the space. So, can I ask you, Linda, as a representative of an institution who are known in as for being experimental, how you felt that transformation to the online as an institution?
Well, I think, first of all, I would say that most museums, or many large museums, have not suddenly transitioned. We've been thinking about this for a very long time. There's a lot of competition among museums to get as many online visitors as possible, because we have recognized that our cultural holdings need to be further democratized. They can't simply be for the people who can afford to come to them, either literally to pay the admission price or to come to the city from far. So we have been working on it. I would like to think that this change is temporary, because obviously I want people to also be able to have a firsthand experience of the art. And what I'm hoping is that we learn from this time in being creative with new online experiences, how we can also continue to do that, but also incorporate that into the way we think about exhibitions. Not to make them more filmable, but to understand better how the public can interface with them in person and in terms of an online experience. And then, of course, the wonderful thing, and I had my last exhibition from 2018, which was a mixture of contemporary and historical art from Iran, we videotaped the entire installation. And if we continue to do things like that, it's wonderful for archival purposes, because traditionally all you have left of an exhibition is the catalog and maybe some still photographs or a little bit of video of the installation. But to be able to have recorded the entire installation is great for future art historians to be able to speak more cogently about the impact of an exhibition when they can actually virtually experience it. So as I said, I think of this as a time when we can learn about technology. And for me, one of the things, especially with historical art, is the challenge of contextualizing it or putting it back into its original context, because we've plucked it either from the ground or from the past or from someplace and stuck it in a vitrine and expect our visitors to understand and admire it. For instance, it's currently at the King Abdulaziz Center right now, but like many museums, we have a beautiful Mamluk enameled glass lamp. And like many of them, it has an inscription quoting from the Ayat Nur. And I've always wanted to be able to show it with the lit, because that's when the meaning of the lamp is activated. And of course, they were produced in multiples, so it's like a reverberating effect. And now is the time to think about doing it as something online, where you can obviously not light the lamp itself, but recreate it digitally, and then perhaps introduce something similar into the installation itself. And using sound also. I've always wanted, historical Islamic art is speaking constantly in a variety of language because it's inscribed, and I've always wanted to recreate that cacophony of sound, whether it's poetry or something a little bit less interesting. And you can do that online, but you can also perhaps do it in the installation itself. So as I said, I think this can give us the opportunity to reimagine the physical installation as we think about how we could make it easier to put it into an online format.
Thank you. Real food for thought. That's incredible. That we're really thinking of this 360 experience of appreciating art. It's wonderful to see. Let me move on to our third question. The past decade has been incredibly exciting for art across the Arab world. Huge amounts has been invested by governments across the region to develop and nurture a thriving art and culture industry. Often this investment has been on the back of large-scale events and exhibitions. What impact do you believe the pandemic and the world into which we emerge, where people will travel less, will have on the growth and viability of the sector? Will we see these large events return anytime soon? Or will we see a different type of art and cultural scene that is smaller, more local perhaps, artistic clusters, cooperatives, more inward focused, more digitally inspired? What do you feel is in store for this region? And let me start with you, Dr. Shabout. You've been an active figure in many of these events. It's where we've met in the past. You've been involved in significant moments such as the Venice Biennale, where the Arab world has been notably present in recent editions. We could also maybe touch a little on the commercial world here too. Can I ask how you see the landscape of our art world shifting?
Well, I can tell you how I hope I can see that the terrain shifting. You know, I mean, I don't think travel will go away. Maybe it's at hold for a while because until we figure out things, but you know, the travel industry is too powerful for it to go away. So we know we will be on planes again. So, you know, that when we will be going to some events. But I mean, I think this is a moment for us to reflect on what does really globalization or the relationship between the global and the local really mean? And do we necessarily need to think of the global as just sort of, you know, bringing everything together in one space, which is then moved into other spaces? Do we necessarily, I mean, as someone, as an art historian who tries to figure out what am I getting specifically out of each biennale that I'm going to, or each art fair that I'm going to, do we really need to have all of those? Do we need to configure the local in a different way, maybe focus on the local in a way that benefits the local more than the fact of sort of plugging in something that perceived as global, but then the local does not necessarily interact with it. Maybe this gives us a chance to see variety of art, as opposed to, you know, most artists feeling the pressure to work in a certain direction so they can be part of this global dialogue. I mean, this is the moment that we are able to sort of think more about how or what is globalization? What does globalization mean? I mean, it's a term that has occupied us for very long, and there are so many definitions, good and bad, for it. Every semester, I spend a good amount of time with my students contemplating that. But how do we now think about the local in a different way in connection to the global? I mean, we all understood that we can't rely on masks coming from China for the pandemic because of various, reasons, and we all had to figure out how to make local masks. And so, I mean, this is an example of how, while we will remain connected, because we are connected here now, whenever there's an advertising of any event, it's giving, LA time, New York time, London time. So clearly we are more connected globally on one level. Our attendees are from all over the world, but at the same time, we're having to look to the local and figure out, what does this moment, for example, in the history of what's happening in terms of racial tensions and connections in the US mean to us here in Texas, for me specifically, for my students, for the understanding of what public monument means, understanding of what exhibitions do need. So, I mean, it is in various ways a moment of reflection. How will we move forward from here remains to be seen, but I'm hopeful that we can learn from it, as all my panelist colleagues have said.
Thank you very much. Linda, how will you continue, for example, your acquisitions if you're not physically seeing works of art? I mean, how can you replace this face-to-face contact with artists with artworks?
I can shop online. I'm an expert at it. So Amazon makes deliveries almost every day to my house. No, I would like, I like going to art fairs. It's not simply about seeing the art, it's the artists are there a lot of the times, even if they're not showing. So it's a matter of being able to meet them and to interface with them, to see things that I wasn't, I almost always end up buying something when I go to Art Dubai, whether it's at the fair or with a dealer. And every time I go, I say, I'm not going to buy anything because we have no acquisition funds. And yet I do. But the fact that it was postponed this year has not stopped me from buying. So I would like there to be travel, and I think there will be travel. I know that the minute that it's okay for Americans to travel to Saudi Arabia, I will be on that plane, because the Beauty and Identity exhibition you mentioned technically closed in March. And I think they'll start charging us rent very soon, because we need to deinstall it. I think that while it's wonderful to connect by Zoom and to make new friends by Zoom or FaceTime and so on, there's no substitute for a genuine contact in person, whether you're wearing a mask and staying 6 feet apart or not. So I think that's another reason. And then, as I said earlier, there's nothing that compares with seeing a work of art in person. I suppose that when you see and this happens quite a lot in LA, if you see an actor or an actress who you know from film and television in person, they look very different also. And I think it's the same with a work of art. You have to really see it in person, especially if it's something that's three-dimensional. And in my case, it's something that I'm going to want to pick up and handle. So you really do need to see it in person. So as I said, I will be traveling as soon as it's safe to do so.
Good. Thank you. Ahmed, can we return to get some insight from you on artist working environments in the major cities in Saudi Arabia through this crisis? I think you're on mute, Ahmed. You need to turn off your mute.
Yeah, I think there is there is different interesting especially in Saudi Arabia now, they are very, very famous using social media and Instagram, Twitter. So there is a lot of practices. I'm happy that I see a lot of connection between artists and between audience in the new level and the new way. I can see this communication becoming more direct rather than to institutionalize it, you know. So it's becoming more direct, it's becoming more easy. I feel we're fighting for a grassroots, you know, every time movement to flourish and to be part of this shaping scene. Yes, we appreciate all of the support and things, but things need to be coming, you know, normal and within its, you know, full time and way. So I think within this time was very good communication. I can see it because I'm in contact with my friends, the art scene in all of the city. You know, Saudi Arabia is a big geographical country, so it was very very active scene during this time. People come back to art, to their life, to their homes more and more.
That's good to hear. Sheikha
Yeah.
Hala, is the same situation true in Bahrain, would you feel? And I wanted to ask you a little bit about the youth. You know, such a high amount of our population in the Arab world is youth. I mean, how is education forming through the crisis?
You know, as I'm hearing everyone discussing this topic, there's one thing that I'd like to share, especially with these online platforms. I mean, at the Bahrain Authority for Culture and Antiquities, we created a very strong program to connect with the public. And there are various sorts of connections. You know, we're bringing the collection of our museums to the public. We're discussing objects and different topics. So it's very informative as well. But on the other hand, we're also creating competitions and ways for the audience to share their works of art, for instance. But what I have noticed is that it opens up to a new audience, to people who not necessarily connected with us before. There was this element of, you know, it's like a safe place where they can share their works, enter a competition. They're not well-known artists, but they're young, aspiring artists. So it's also created like a freedom to share new thoughts, new ideas through these online platforms. This is something I personally really enjoyed you know, being exposed to. And I think it's good to have a platform where you're not intimidated to share, you're not intimidated to share your views or your works or your design or, you know, your creative thoughts. So this is nice. And as well, as Ahmed said, I'm very, very hopeful that people will bounce back to their norms and we will regain our strength as cultural institutions. I mean, there is nothing that can substitute the actual contact of humans together. You know, the sounds, the smells, the, you know, the atmosphere, the conversations you have with people. This is all part of any experience, and especially when we talk about the culture sector, you can't have, you know, a theater empty or a concert with a live performance and no one's there to watch and interact, or, you know, work of art that's just shown on a virtual platform that is not just for this. But I'm very, very hopeful that we will bounce back and things will start to pick up. And this is a learning curve for all of us. And I think that we did stay very much connected, even in this disconnected state that we're living in. So I'm very hopeful.
Thank you. I mean, thank goodness we're in some aspects of the cultural sector where there's an end to this. We've just announced Louvre Abu Dhabi will be reopening on June the 24th, along with many institutions. LACMA has plans as well. So
we haven't closed, you know, in Bahrain, we haven't closed the museums or the cultural institution. So we stayed open. And of course, our audiences were very, very little. So it was a very sad time for us to see our platforms being empty, but the actual museums never closed in Bahrain. So we were open.
But the timing was unfortunate, as it was your spring week. Was it not?
Exactly. I mean, and the Spring of Culture, as I said, it's one of the most important seasons here in Bahrain. And it's where not only the government sector shares a very rich cultural agenda, but also local galleries and different initiatives goes around in the kingdom. But, you know, as you know, unfortunately this year we had to pause everything.
And Akram, you already mentioned your exhibition in Milan that had to be changed and altered and delayed. Can you tell us a little bit more about how your plans moving forward are for international exhibitions, but also about your local community?
The exhibition in Milan is still going to happen, but we will need to work together on a new date. Possibly, it was supposed to coincide with MiArt, which is the art fair in Milano. Probably it will be still parallel to MiArt, but in 2021 instead of 2020. From my side, I would like to travel less. So I mean, being on a round table, as we see, we can do it online. We don't need to pay airfare, pollute the world. And I would travel only when I'm having a solo exhibition or when I'm like a film festival, for example. If I have a film in a film festival, maybe I would travel. But yeah, I prefer to focus in the same place. I mean, I'll give you an example. From the beginning of March until today, I'm in the same place. I'm able to see for the same, I mean, since long time ago, I did not see how winter ends and
Seasons are changing.
How winter ends and spring starts. Slowing down also with less air traffic. I can see around me in Beirut a lot of birds, a lot of the air is clean. So have we done wrong to Earth? Not only as artists, as humans. And this is a question that is essential. I think it comes to you in situations like this, when you are alone with yourself. Was I being egoistic, wanting to take the plane every other day to be in Milano, and next day I want to be in Seoul, and 3 days later in New York, only for 48 hours, and then come back to the Arab world? It's a serious question, and you only resolve it with yourself. It's like the things you do with God, only between you and God, only between you and yourself. You need to decide if this is essential as a trip to make or not. I think it's about time also to, I mean, art is already looking at ecology, looking at issues related to Earth and to the exploitation of resources. What are we leaving to the next generation? It's a serious question. I would like to see more of it among artists. And I think, like myself, I would be looking at that as well.
Fascinating, absolutely. I mean, I think the utopia we imagine certainly doesn't have a large carbon footprint when we're thinking of it. It's a vital part of the discussion. Thank you. So let's move.
Wants to interview.
Sorry.
I like, especially talking about environment. I want to say, you know, it's a I read an article about how Corona time, you know, did what as a positive for the environment more than whatever happened ever in our life.
Politics,
you know, scientist or a politician or but it's good, but it's sad that we make it, you know, we help the environment because we forced by crisis. Otherwise, all of our effort as a politician or activist or whatever doesn't work. So when a crisis comes and shut down everything, then we give from the other side to that. So it's you know, it's a big question, like what Akram said, for ourselves.
Yeah.
And Nada.
Yeah, if I may add, of course, you know, as all of us also agree that there is a specific experience when you are in that city and you are, you know, in that specific culture, which we will, you know, we do miss. I do miss, you know, I miss Dubai in March because that's the time I go to Dubai. But maybe we need, like Akram and Ahmed are saying, a balance. Maybe we don't need to be hopping planes every so often. And maybe we don't need that many temptations from the art world. So maybe we don't need all these specific, you know, biennales. Maybe we need consolidation. Maybe we need to think globally, you know, means that perhaps when there is a Art Basel happening in Miami or happening in Basel, maybe they need to be more locally oriented. Well, you know, there is one specific forum that is more globally connected. I mean, I think we just need to reconfigure the way we think about these things and what they really mean to us in terms of that. Because like Akram says, we're doing this, we're here, we are, you know, and it's working really well. Yes, we're not having, you know, dates from Saudi Arabia, you know, to eat, but, or the coffee, but, you know.
maybe they will digitally will come with this formula.
Technology can help. I hope someone's listening who is in charge of this. But thank you so much, because I absolutely agree. I mean, in some ways, it's been a moment for us to rethink, to really justify this travel, why we act in the way that we do, and why the world functions in the way it does. You know, maybe in certain aspects of the cultural world, it is to our advantage to press the reset button.
If I could just say something, I think what we're hearing is everyone saying we can be less selfish. And probably to me, I had the same experience as Akram, but in Los Angeles, which is famous for its pollution. A few weeks into the shutdown, I realized that the air was clean and it looked so different. And that sort of made me start thinking about being hopeful that we're not approaching a dystopia, but we could make a utopia. And it comes from all of us agreeing, not necessarily the politicians and the people who want us to travel, want us to drive everywhere and so on, but the rest of us agreeing that we can do less of it and still lead rich, wonderful, and full lives, and to look into our own lives, as Akram is saying, and say, well, I don't need this. I don't need this. I'm going to keep this. And if everybody did that, there'd be cleaner air, and there'd be a future, not just our future, but for further generations. So that's just my 2 cents. Sorry.
No, it's wonderful. I mean, I think we need to all think about a balance about, you know, what we need to go back to, you know, what we need to rebuild, what needs to recover, you know, what the essential components are, and what we can move towards, you know, what are the essential ingredients of the utopia. And for my fourth question, I'd like to ask each of you to kind of reimagine what the art and culture community could or should be doing to not only recover or rebuild, but to shape a new and better reality and role for arts and culture as a force for good in the world. We've already reached into that really with looking at the environmental. But Akram, specifically in the context of the art and culture sector in Lebanon, how can we start to make it more resilient, more stable, more sustainable?
More solidarity between artists of different generations, whether you like their art or not. I think this is really essential, because we've been working and becoming currents, like political currents within the art contexts. And I think it's about time that we act together, support each other, whether you like the work or not, because the quality has nothing to do with the practice, with the fact that you are practicing and producing a record for the future. Today, you may not like it, but in the future, others might see in it something exceptional that you are not capable of seeing today. And it's only within this mindset that you start producing a shield altogether. Maybe you are weak alone, but altogether, it will change significantly the landscape, the market, the institution. If artists start working without competition, without rivalry, just be a soul, just treat each other as souls working together in the same context, sharing the.
I think we've seen that across even the commercial art world. You know, galleries in London have created WhatsApp groups. Condo have brought together galleries who normally are in competition.
I hope it continues, honestly. I hope it continues like this.
You know, you even have, you know, Sotheby's putting together a sale together with the Al-Sakal galleries. There's all these connections across the different platforms. which is fascinating. But Sheikha Hala, what should the role of governments and cultural ministries be in getting the cultural industry back on its feet?
I think the main role for us at the cultural institutions is really to make sure we are inspiring, to make sure there's proper nurturing. I mean, I'm a firm believer of education, and I believe that there is so much to learn through any collection, through any museums, through our historic sites. I really believe that every country has its unique heritage, its unique traditions and flavors, and I would love to hold on to that, to really make it present in curriculums, in the way we look at how we're educating our children and what we teach them, and how much information we give them to allow them to grow. So I really believe that the cultural institution plays a huge role in connecting, in making sure the youth are nurtured and inspired and educated well. We need to raise awareness on so many of the important issues. I mean, I really enjoyed listening to Akram and his direct comment on the role of us as individuals in the field of environment, and how we need to also make sure we create our own guidelines of how we interact with the rest of the world, and what sort of lessons we can learn from. But going back to cultural institutions and their core message for the community is really to inspire and to nourish and to make sure we're sending the right messages. I do believe that our platforms will continue. I mean, in the Kingdom of Bahrain, we've been very lucky that there's a very important local art exhibition that has been going on for 46 years. And I'm very proud of this platform, because it's really a platform where not only the pioneers in the art world, if I may say, in the Kingdom of Bahrain, but it opens to a lot of the young artists to share and to exhibit their works alongside the bigger names and the more established artists. So for me, working in the cultural institution, I really believe that platforms like these should continue and should be, should grow, really.
And then financial support. I mean, I understand that Bahrain has the government is covering kind of private sector salaries. It's helping with bills.
Absolutely.
It has an practical response financially.
Absolutely. And this amazing role of the government in supporting the community and allowing people to breathe, allowing people to exhale. I mean, the electricity, water bills, loans, there were so many measures that were taken into consideration to support people in this crisis here in Bahrain. And that's really, that's a very beautiful, humane, direct role that the government is playing in all our lives in this time of crisis. So it's really wonderful to be, to have your backs held really in this time of crisis. But, we have to keep looking at the utopia and keep believing that, through all of us, we can achieve what we would like for the youth, for the next stage after the coronavirus. So I'm hoping.
Yes, absolutely. Akram, can I just go back to you just to ask a little bit about the solidarity funds that are coming through for the art and culture structures in Lebanon?
Yeah, AFAC, the Arab Fund for Arts and Culture, in collaboration with Al-Mawrid, Al-Thaqafi, have established a solidarity fund, like an emergency fund for Arab artists and institutions. So in the absence of public funding for the arts, because I mean, we have to admit, arts is the least of the priorities of so many Arab countries. So in the absence of that kind of support, it's thanks to AFAC and Al-Mawrid Al-Thaqafi, many institutions will probably be financially supported, so their losses would be partially covered by these institutions. And these are two institutions active in the culture sector, but there are so many other institutions like them active in so many other layers of society. And bridging or covering for the absence of the state.
Thank you.
Would be temporary.
And Ahmed, can I ask you, I know that you're involved in the funding initiative initiated by Ithra Gallery. Can you tell us a little bit about that in the kingdom? Oh, you're on mute, Ahmed, you're on mute.
Yes, this initiative started by artists, other artists, 8 artists, and thank you for Ithra Gallery for support this. We did an edition from our artwork, and this fund is to support the young artists in time now that they, you know, maybe during this time they couldn't you know, benefit from the time or for all of this. So this fund from ours, from 8 artists, another guy will go to the young artists and generation. So, we agreed just last week with all of us to make it every year. So not only for Corona. So because it's very important to, you know, we thought about something from artists and come to the artists themselves. Then we expect from them, they will do after with the others. Yeah. So I think that was the fund that we built it. It's called Ma'an, together.
And so again, it's the different generations helping each other.
Yes, like, it's a generation that we could, you know, sell our artwork, and this fund will go to the young artists that will select it by committee also from us and from some of our curator. Yeah, so it's kind of social support. I think it's a good also communication between 2 generations, or to keep the link.
Yeah. Oh, wonderful. Dr. Nada, can I turn to you as well, just to think, I know you've been involved in art prizes before as well, and artist presentations. How do you envisage that moving forward for you, the relationship with artists, the support they need?
I mean, you know, this is so hopeful to hear about everything that particularly Akram and Ahmed are talking about in terms of solidarity. And art history has always sort of had this sort of strange relationship with the art world, because, you know, we speak as if in a different language, but perhaps, you know, there are more opportunities for us now to also support each other. And this is kind of happening in the art history world as well, where we're sharing more resources than we've ever done before. And the hope is that this continues, but then these resources are shared among, you know, not just within one field, but to really do sort of cross-reference these fields where, you know, I mean, we are the historians, we are the custodians of what you guys are doing, the artists, because we're writing the context for this as, you know, it moves forward, and as, you know, its memory is recorded. And so there need to be sort of this more sort of support with each other. This is a moment where we're meditating on a lot of ideas. Hopefully we are able to put them into action as, you know, we move forward. My hope is that this moment of solidarity continues, that we don't forget this moment of solidarity. I mean, we're stress testing a lot of ideas. As, you know, Linda said, a lot of what is happening virtually with the museums didn't happen overnight. It has been in, you know, contemplation for a while. Similar ideas with everything else. We encourage artists to reach out more to us, art historians, not just so we can do an interview with you, but to tell us, how can you, in fact, support you? Local communities, you know, just sort of shaping these local communities of artists and engaging with the art historians to know more about this. Because, I mean, global issues are global issues, you know, the climate, the economy, the pandemic, race, and so on. But then, you know, there are more immediate local issues as well. And they shouldn't be in competition either. And us historians should not have to choose, but we have to think of all of these as equal and be able to engage with them.
Thank you. Linda, would you like to weigh in sort of from the institutional perspective to this?
Yeah, I agree with what Nada is saying, and I like to think that museums are a critical part of the interaction with artists. And it's thrilling to think that artists can support artists, and art historians can support culture, and museums can support everyone. And I think that we can do more of that. Sometimes it takes something really bad happening. We've seen this in personal lives. Sometimes it brings families together. And in a global sense, we're a global family. And this is something that has, for better or worse, brought us all together and made us realize that we're in the same circumstance. And I probably am an optimist by nature, and I have no inside information that makes me be an optimist. But I think this is an important moment, just as it's an important moment in America in changing our thinking about not only healthcare, but race at the same time, and how the two actually affect one another. I think in thinking about a world without culture, we've come to realize we don't want that either. And that through programs like this, where we can connect virtually, we can talk about these types of things, because obviously if you can't dream about the future, you can't make it the future. And by default, someone else decides on what the future is, which I think doing something like this and causing us to think what would be a utopic concept for the arts, for a museum to be able to bring to the public in a non-hierarchical, democratic manner, without so much subjectivity that already does exist, the arts that are being produced around us. And I know there is concern about even local institutions that are not thriving. It's larger ones that will be able to survive this, and local ones which provide a forum for local artists and for smaller communities of people who cannot travel to large art museums. I think that's something that institutions like mine will think about in the future, because we don't want to lose that, whether it's a small museum in Saudi or a small museum in America. Those institutions are critical for communities. And the same thing with artists who are working in isolation, perhaps, who can't afford to travel to a city or a university where there's a large art school, or travel to an art fair. I think that this type of forum, through communicating in this way, will help us to come into contact with them, and maybe to help to support them in the future. And then just in terms of what I think the future of how the museums are being impacted by this, we're already moving at my museum to touchless experiences for visitors, which of course is always the case when it comes to the art. It's supposed to be a touchless experience. But I think what could be part of the new normal is smaller numbers of people having access to the art. Maybe we would extend our hours. Maybe we would be able to do what we do in my local Trader Joe's, where you come in and you're directed to the dairy section, even if that's not where you want to begin your shopping experience. But we might have visitors. We might be able to say, there's very few visitors in this section. Why don't you begin your visit to the museum there? Because as we all know, there's nothing worse than having to wait in line to look at a work of art. And something else which I'm glad to see if we do away with it, because we don't want people congregating around text panels or around labels, is perhaps not to have them on the wall. Because I don't especially care for them. I mean, I like to write, but I don't think they are necessarily enriching for the art experience. I think we want people to commune with the art, because this is their one moment when they can do that. They can read a book at home. They can, we have sections where they can look on an iPad and read that information, but they don't have to have it on the wall right next to the work of art. So I think that's also something that we have to think about offering an alternative to, because it will keep people further apart.
Thank you. Yes, and it could be on your phone or in any sense, that information. Yeah. Thank you so much. That's vital to bring that into the discussion. So for our final interventions with the panel, I'd like to ask, before we move into the Q&A, which we must do soon, because I think we've got lots of questions flying around. As a final question, I'd like to ask each of you to give a short example of a change or moment during this crisis, which has brought you hope. Linda, can I start with you?
Well, yes, I already mentioned I already mentioned seeing a clear day in Los Angeles, and that was a realization, but I won't go into that. Probably something that really made me feel hope was the day I walked out in my neighborhood and almost every lawn had a Black Lives Matter sign on it. I get emotional about that, but it made me think that my community, my local community, our city has understood something that I can't say it's been lifelong, but I understood this from the time I was complaining to a friend from graduate school who, like me, had spent a lot of time in Cairo, who the friend is African-American, and I happened to say how uncomfortable I always feel in Cairo, that I'm being stared at because the color, and I'm covered up, and it's the color of my hair and the color of my skin, and I'm not comfortable and I can't wait to leave. And she said, that's how I feel in New York. And I have never forgotten that, because of course New York is our home. I was just visiting in Cairo, and to see that being discussed in America now, and being given the same attention as the virus is so key. So it's not that I know that the future will be better, but it makes me feel that if we can talk about these types of issues and feel them, and if my neighborhood, which is certainly not African American, all the kids made these signs, can do that, I really feel hope.
Thank you. Dr. Nada, is the situation similar where you are?
Yes, very much so. And I have to say that, yes, that this is, and I too am an optimist. Maybe it's something to do with art history, Linda, because we look at back, we look at history, but so I never lost hope, and I'm hopeful that, moving forward, things will only get better, at least, even though I have to say I'm an optimist, but I don't have that much faith in humanity. Yeah, a whole different story. But anyway, so yes, solidarity. Solidarity, not only, Black Lives Matter here in the US, but as someone who teaches Orientalism and the reception of the other, which is, continuously problematic. And as someone who does look different in America, despite the fact, I'm often still asked, where are you from, originally at least, and it's always a fun game because I was born in Glasgow. So, it's create this notion of identity. It is a moment of solidarity, and this is extremely hopeful. And we're hoping that, slowly we are able to unfold through these tensions of, race and identity and nationality, and do find the solidarity in humanity itself, even despite the fact that I, may not have as much faith in humans, but I do, have faith in humanity.
Thank you. I hope so. Akram, can I turn to you?
Sure. I think I don't have a specific incident to talk about, but I remember very well that after a few days of being confined at home, when I did my first walk with no mission to do, just stroll, it gave me a lot of power. And when I went to the mountains, to nature, a few weeks later, when it was possible, there is something about being in the middle of a forest that penetrates you without your consent. It just comes into you. Therefore, you see, it's important to mobilize oneself sometime, not mobilize, to move out physically, whether to go to a forest or to go to another country, a different culture. It's really important. Like for an Arab person, a random Arab who spent all his life in Lebanon, you need to go meet Africans, people of a different color, different mindsets, different language. Go meet them at home. It's equally important for a Texas-raised man or woman to come to a Muslim country. Being there at home is totally different. So the idea of leaving your comfort zone and going to another area, another country with different laws also. There's so many things that are illegal in the Arab world, but are legal in different places, in different countries. It's important to make that shift and to decide yourself how to orient your north, let's say, how to orient your north, your south, etc. So travel is essential, but it cannot be, it cannot happen daily. You need to make a balance, as Nada said, as I think everyone is agreeing. And I'm just stressing on the idea of meeting others, meeting different people, avoiding to fall into Orientalist traditions or extremist traditions. I think meeting people at home is an essential step to knowing who they are.
I couldn't agree more. I actually just took an 8-month time out with my family traveling the world, which finished at the beginning of the crisis. And I couldn't agree more. Traveling and experiencing culture is essential, and we will be able to go back to doing it soon, inshallah. Ahmed, can I turn to you?
I noticed something. I think it's really important lately, and I think it's the governments and the political system for the first time in our modern life looking to the health and humanity not as an emergency. No, they look at it as a need, as a something, as a morality, as a part of our life, as a holistic approach. Because we see how we are very, very, you know, if I can say very greedy, going through this tough business system, then we understand that we forget a lot of things in the big way about the health. Then I find a lot of institutions, especially governmental, political system, asking for art and culture again. And, you know, and resiliArt is a beautiful program now. They're saying art and resili. That's yesterday I was talking about art as a therapy for the first time in the platform. So it's something very, very important that we look at ourselves again. And we are now putting this in front of our goals. You know, we spoke about everything as a sustainability, but we say it, but we didn't know what is it in reality. Now, I think it's a very important time that we will put it in front of us. Health is not a fancy thing. Health is everything. It's a holistic approach. It's a part of our, you know, mental life, happiness, sharing. It's beyond that. So we didn't live because the economical system. No, that's not the goals. There is many goals beyond that. So I think now there is a big voice for another part. So which I really feel it's a very positive time, and I really happy to see everyone talking about art and health in all of the homes and all of the countries. It's full of life again.
Thank you. Sheikh Hala, some final words from you before some questions. I think you're muted. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, I'm thinking of sad moments really, you know, while, you know, facing this crisis. And I think as a mother, for me, it was very sad to see my children doing their online classes at home, because, you know, day in and day out, it's quite sad to see them stuck at the house. And yes, they are offered an online class and they can log on, but, you know, it's a totally different experience than going to school. And I mean, I missed seeing them, you know, get up in the morning and be active and have a normal routine. So that was really sad. And one of the other sad moments for me on a personal note is really, I went to the office every day, even in this crisis. I wasn't in quarantine and I was in the office, and we had to reduce the scale of people who would attend. A lot of people worked at home, but it was really sad to walk into empty corridors. And you know, my office has 2 doors, and immediately I had to open both doors just to kind of, you know, get a glimpse of someone passing, you know, from the corridor. And I think the strength of what we do and how we interact is when we interact with people. Roads were empty. And for me, it's very comforting to once again feel that life is coming back slowly, gradually. Roads are being slowly filled, shops are open again. So, you know, for me, that was really a positive way to gain my strength back and to gain my happiness back in that area.
Thank you so much. Now we really must, I can feel people at home are itching to get involved in this debate. We've been inundated with questions. So let me just begin our Q&A. So first off, a question for Akram and Ahmed. Ahmed mentioned that artists' work is opening up to more spirituality and the importance of culture. Is this a national culture, a world culture? Akram said that art needs an interface. Are we drifting away from national art during this time? And is art widening beyond borders due to this? Who wants to go first? Ahmed?
Okay. I think it's a very important question, and it has been a big debate about this. But let me tell once. Of course, I'm believing beyond borders, and I'm one of people and artists who I hate borders anyway. But the concept here is very important and beyond in reality, because let's take example. There is very important example during the Spanish flu, the pandemic of Spanish flu, when there is a Great Depression, and I think in 30s in America, maybe 33, then there was a very important reform happening from the government in USA during the time of Roosevelt, when they did the project New Deal. A New Deal was to do with supporting workers and artists. Artists has to live. Artists has to live, otherwise no way. It was a really tough time. Most of the artists in that time, it was a really very national, very bad art work if we go through it. But there is a great artist coming from like Rothko and I think Jackson Pollock, if I am right. But there is very important in history where we can't, understand how the national art could be part of the movement. Is it identity? And it's similar when we think about culture with the big C. It's about diversity, about everyone is about crossing the border. But when we think about it as an identity, so it's a more philosophical question. I'm in the time that I think non-nationalism will start in the future, will be a unified future. But of course, we cannot be this kind of aggressiveness on the way if we want to be practical, to think about the reality I was very protest against anti-national, anti-nationals, but when I engage with many systems, try to understand, I learn a lot from the last 3 or 4 years when I engaged with many different systems, and that's very important question, and we're still in building on that. This is how I see it. It's like the different when we think about culture as a big C or culture itself.
Thank you. Akram, what do you think about borders?
Fundamentally, what is the role of art? What is the mission of art? What is art anyway? I don't want to over complicate things for people, but I see that many people do not find a niche for them in their own culture, and they end up in this little identified, little formatted area that is called the arts, and they produce things that have no function, and they sell them, and they exchange them, and they get to show them to others, and they make events around them. And this is so fulfilling, because like I'll give you a different example. I studied at a new school in New York. I lived the 90s in New York, and I came out from that school completely believing that I work for social change. When I look at that time from my perspective here it's like, okay, that was a phase in my life, because today I know I cannot change the world. All that I can do is testify from a location. Therefore, locality is part of my work. It's not nationalism. It has nothing to do with values of patriotism at all. It's a locality that sees no borders, as Ahmed says. It's a locality that is porous. And I started identifying myself like a historian of that place, but instead of using text, instead of producing history books, I produce artworks that are imbued by the place, that carry its history, that carry traces, documents. So therefore, I collect a lot of things while working, with the idea of pushing them into the work. So the work carries all these records and tells stories. And therefore, I want to give a testimony of my time, a testimony of my place. This is why half of my work is in Saida, rotates around Saida, which is my hometown. Yeah. I tell indirectly the stories of my father and my mother, and things that reached me from long time ago. And I'm in a way I'm their keeper.
Thank you, Linda. Do you want to weigh in?
It's very interesting to hear from an artist's perspective, because as Nada will testify, art history is all about borders, labels, and creating boundaries that may never have existed, creating, in the past anyway, national identities that didn't exist, and giving art labels of national identities that the artists themselves may never have identified with. And in terms of, I'm going back to Akram's remark earlier about as long as he's alive, he wants to be part of the interpretation and display of his art. And I think in rethinking art history, how we install it in museums, there's much to be learned from having a dialogue with contemporary artists. And that's something I have been engaged with over the past 10 years. So it's interesting to hear, and then to try and think, how do you remove the borders, the geographical boundaries from the study of art, or how do you create something that makes it comprehensible, but does not instill in it something that isn't there, like a testimony to a national identity or anything else of that sort? Because as Nada will say, so much of art history and the ability to communicate is about putting things into boxes and categories in order to explain them to students or to the public. So I think this is critical that we use this time also to rethink the labels that we use, who we include and who we exclude, in order to make it much more inclusive.
What's another? You wanted to?
Yes, I totally agree with what Linda just said. And this is a problematic that we are dealing with in art history, particularly if we want to sort of, say we want to globalize the approach of art history, where, we don't have just one chapter on Islamic art, which seems to be sort of completely disconnected from the rest of what the book is telling us happening around the world. So, I mean, there are lots of problematics of how to get there, and, decolonizing art history as a field is definitely one of them. But what I would say is that, what is equal to, because what Akram just said is beautifully and poetic, by the way, Akram, I mean, I'm going to steal this, I'm going to record this and steal it as a way of explaining even modernism, because here's how we've been fighting about this idea, despite the fact that we know identity politics is an important thing, but it's really about the locality, not about the nation, despite the fact that it was at some point in time. What I would say is, this is why it is so important to access archives. And, the art world, and I'm hoping, let's say, in this hopeful moment that we're doing maybe half travel, a hybrid model, and we're doing more things online. Well, this money that we're saving from not traveling and having these events with a lot of food and luxury and hotels, maybe can then be channeled not only into artist projects and community building, but into research, because we need these voices from the 20th century, for example, which we now know exist. There are a lot of them. You know, we're finding manifestos and letters and you know, what the artists have said, which are making us change how we even think about identity politics of the 20th century in the Arab world. So, you know, I mean, we need to learn from the contemporary artist what Akram is saying about the moment and think sort of, you know, backwards with it as well.
Thank you so much. Linda, can we move to a question for you? From your experience with LACMA, can you expand on how most institutional systematic treatment of art as a product or a tool for organizing narratives and information can be revised to re-establish our connection with creativity as a natural birthright that is practiced outside of neoliberal capitalism? Is Linda's experience with curating the show at Ithra perhaps reflective of this thinking?
Which thinking? As
I guess we're talking about the reconnecting with creativity.
Well, I'd like to think that although creativity, you're right, the questioner is right. We sometimes get that part of the narrative sometimes gets lost in the curatorial narrative that's imposed on top of it, and the story that the curator is trying to tell about the history of the work of art, its relationship to other works of art, and so on. So I don't know if the show at Ithra does that. I can say what I wanted to do with it was to address a local audience of visitors, because I knew that many of the visitors there had no experience with museums prior and no experience with this art.
I believe the person asking the question is very much from Tehran, so they would have seen it.
Okay, well, I meant that the installation to inspire younger people to do what I do and to interpret, you know, come into my field and to teach me, to have brought their own perspective to it as citizens of Saudi Arabia, as Muslims, as Arabs, and so on, and to bring that perspective to the study of Islamic art, which is mostly studied from the perspective of the West. Even people from outside the West come to study in the West, and they're imbued with that way of thinking. And I'm not saying that there isn't more than one way of thinking, but we have to hear. We have to hear from both sides in order to move forward. So that was my hope with the exhibition. I think it's organized in a way that shows its creativity and also its historical context. To me, I just think everything looked absolutely beautiful. And if that's what the ultimate expression of creativity is, then perhaps it does that. But as I said, I really wanted to inspire the local audience in the exhibition and challenge them to do what I do.
I think the same questioner, who is an independent artist and curator, they've said perhaps the answer is in changing primary education to involve more art and culture related subjects, which I know is a very important one, particularly in the Gulf. So let's move on just to a third question. Do you think that in a way the pandemic allowed artists to change the way they get inspiration? Instead of tracking global trends, it now comes from within, which in turn gives their art personal character and identity, rather than focusing on how to be globally appreciated. And in terms of cultural institutions, and due to the travel ban, do you think that those institutes are better serving the local consumer? Maybe Ahmed, it would be nice to hear from you. Where your inspiration is coming from, if it's changed, or if you see it in the younger generation in Saudi as well.
Yeah, I think this question is, you know, it's normal that we you know, the context will shape our practices and the result of art. I think the context and the time, everything represents the moment that artists will practice and will do and will interfere with. I agree. Sometimes there is, you know, rather than to be appreciated globally or things, I agree, you know, it's something on our life in the art, you know, all of us, we're looking for appreciation or to be globally, but sometimes it's good to think inside and to go through the context and be more, you know, with yourself. Also that maybe not only us, maybe all of this, the system of art, you know, like, because during the last year, the art system creates something difficult, you know, between the audience and between the art and artists. So maybe, yes, maybe it could be a good, I agree. Yeah, it could be a good time.
And Akram, a question for you here. Will the analog become important again? Will it be valued over the digital instead of the other way around, as everyone now assumes? What are your thoughts on that? Oh, you're on mute.
The progression or the natural evolution of media presumes that you go from analog and then you become digital and maybe in the future something else. But I think we're moving not towards eliminating former media, but we are moving into an era where different media cohabit same space. I mean, we've seen that Super 8 films are not extinct. There are, when the traditional manufacturers stopped making them, other manufacturers mushroomed. They became a little bit more expensive, but there are people who buy those old cameras secondhand, fix them, and there are places to fix them, especially in Europe and North America. And you can buy these films, and there are still labs that develop these films. So LPs are back as well, turntables. So I think we're more moving towards like multiple platforms. But I would like, if I'm allowed, I would like to answer also, to add to what Ahmed was saying regarding COVID-19, like this confinement. Keep in mind, it's changed the economy of the world. It relieved us as individuals, maybe, or stressed us a little bit, but we cannot consider it a disaster. It's nothing near an earthquake. So it cannot be like I always refer to the Israeli invasion, which happened when I was 16, and I think it marked me forever. One time I was looking, you know, I look a lot at photo albums of people. I like the family album as a genre. And I was seeing different pictures of the same man that I was interviewing. And I say, oh, I see the fashion of mustaches changed from this photograph to that photograph, because he had like those traditional mustaches. And then in another picture, 1 year later, he had absolutely no mustache. You know what his answer was? In the first picture, I was not yet a refugee. When I became a refugee, I thought I do not deserve a mustache.
Wow.
So COVID-19 is nothing close to this.
No.
So we should all be happy that we're alive, that our parents are fine, that our beloved ones are fine too.
Thank you. Very true words. I'm just going to ask one final question. I apologize to our audience how there's lots of questions. We'll maybe look at them later, but we're restricted to time. But Sheikha Hala, I'm conscious that we haven't addressed a question to you. There was one that came through just about the possibility of how like events within the Gulf, art fairs or other cultural events, whether they can be more local and regionalized. And if you envisage a future where that could be the case, shifting events between different states, for example, within the GCC or a wider Arab region?
I think definitely strategies of how we're going to showcase collections, exhibitions, what we're going to receive, how we're going to, you know, communicate in this field will definitely be affected a lot. I mean, we're very hopeful and we're very happy that plans for Expo, announcements about the Sharjah Biennale are actually happening, and things will pick up hopefully next year. But this is also a very good time to focus on what we would like to tell our audiences from within our country, to shift to exhibitions that talk about our national heritage, our local talents, and raise awareness in this field, because it's not a traveling exhibition. There are no expenses to be no large expenses to be a burden on any cultural institution. But I'm a still firm believer that connecting with the rest of the world is very important, and I'm really looking forward to the Expo experience next year, to the Sharjah Biennale, to Venice coming back, and so these are pillars. These are very important platforms that we want to attend and want to maintain a very good and strong relationship with, obviously. But in terms of what we show in our local galleries, in our museum spaces, we can rethink that, of course, and think of new ways and new themes to discover and to explore.
Thank you so much. And it really leaves me now to thank my 5 wonderful panelists for all their incredible insights, and also the attendees that have joined us through Zoom and through YouTube, and to Ithra and UNESCO for allowing us this platform, which has really delved into the very, very definitions of art, the roots of culture, assessing everything from the environment to the digital platforms that we live in. Thank you so much for enriching us. We've had wonderful quotations from Nietzsche. We've had wonderful quotes: if you can't dream, if you can't dream, you can't make it happen, which I think was very, very telling. To quote Oscar Wilde, a map of the world that does not include utopia is not worth even glancing at, for it leaves out the one country at which humanity is always landing. It's been our intention to draft a roadmap to a better future for the cultural industry in the Arab world. I think we've made good inroads into that, so thank you. Culture and society go hand in hand. You cannot divorce culture from the community in which it springs and to which it inspires. You are all part of that community, and we have a shared responsibility to give culture the space, money, time it deserves. Thank you for sharing your time with us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Ahmed, stay in touch.
يا اكيد بكلمك، بتصل عليك اليوم.
Please.
يلا thank you.
Bye.
Still live, but goodbye.